Thanks, disembodied hot girl voice. This is Two Nerds and a Joke with Robert and Ernie. I'm Ernie.
And I am Robert, and yes, we are both extremely excited today because we have a special guest.
Oh my gosh.
With
the smartest guy we've ever had on this podcast. I'm going to record and say it.
Yeah, no, go right. Go ahead and say why it's the smartest there, Ernie. If you're going to take lead, go right ahead.
He's got letters after his name that it's just amazing. First time I've talked to a PhD.
Yes, and I want to make sure I get this right. Jason Von Stein is a
Von Stietz.
Dang it! I did it wrong. I knew it was going to happen. I knew it, Jason. I knew. We can call you Doctor. All right. How do you say the last name? Jason Von
Stietz.
Stietz. I will get it right by the end of the show. I promise. Jason Von Stietz, PhD, clinical psychologist. PhD is the important part here, but even bigger than that is important and impressive. He is a huge fan of two of the things that start with star. And we both are very huge fans of that, of course.
How conflicting. How conflicting.
I know. There are two universes that some people say are the opposite ends of the spectrum, and they should never meet. But I think we may have that in... should I call you Dr. Jason?
You can. You can. I usually just go by Jason, but...
we're talking the stars, Warner, especially we're starting Star Trek, which I think correct me if I'm wrong, you're the bigger fan of Star Trek in some ways, I would assume.
Oh, that's tough, but yeah, I would say I'm a bigger fan of Star Trek.
Well, at least at least up to this point, it's been a lot less controversial.
That's true.
Wow, how has it ever been? Because you know what they say about Star Wars. The only thing that can ruin Star Wars are Star Wars fans. So
yes, Star Trek fans are very, very minutia oriented. Is that something that you pride yourself on, Jason? That you very much into the details of it, or you just like the overarching stories?
Wow. Yeah. I mean, I do like the little details. I like the philosophical discussions and, trying to, like Picard, if we're talking about Star Trek Next Gen, Picard needs to figure out if something's right or wrong. And like what is the impossible solution that he needs to come up with in order to solve all of the problems. So I really like that, and then I also like the overarching storyline of it started with Captain Kirk, or I guess really even before that we have the prequel series, and then like there's this continuity that keeps going and is going to start again in the new Picard show. So yeah, I like all of it.
Now, I've noticed that in the Star Trek world, because I've watched every Star Trek, everybody loves all Star Trek, it seems, but everybody has their favorite series or characters. Obviously, Picard is a great one for the moral conversation and that's like that really deep philosophy. But what for you? What is your character? What is your show that that's the one you can always sit down and just watch?
Sure. For me, that would be Next Gen. I started watching when I was a little kid. I had like a little toy tricorder. I had a little Commander Riker and a little Geordi LaForge action figure. And I mean, of course, I didn't really fully understand like all the nuance to the stories and all that stuff, but I thought Geordi had a cool visor, and I thought that oil monster that ate up Yar was scary. There's lots of lots of cool stuff that I really liked, and then I didn't watch it for a long time, and then at some point in grad school, I just thought, hey, I remember that show. I remember that Star Trek show. I want to check that out, and then I would just put it on and then write some emails and do some work, and then slowly I just kind of got sucked into it and became really passionate about it again. So Next Gen is still my favorite, but more recently I finally watched DS9 because I didn't watch that for years, and it was a slow burn for me too. But eventually I was like, oh, this show is awesome. I like it because it's more modernized, where you don't get that perfect solution. A lot of times, the characters are much more gray versus black and white, so that was really attractive to me. But I would still say that Next Gen is probably my favorite show overall.
That's cool. I now for me, I've had more exposure to Star Trek in my life because of the sheer volume of like shows and
Mm,
movies. So for me, as a
yeah.
kid, I remember the original Star Trek series, and I felt it kind of fun. And I
Right,
remember the
right.
Saturday cartoon was kind of okay, but what really caught my attention were the movies, and
Mm,
from the original crew. So for me, 2, 4, and 6 were probably the best ones because no one likes the odd number ones, and I didn't like the odd number ones. Um, then Next Generation came out after Star Trek 4, or around the same
mhm.
time, and I loved watching the Next Generation. Like that to me was like way better than the original Star Trek series, the show.
Mhm.
So I fell in love with that. Now, for me, the spin-offs, like Deep Space Nine, I always felt it kind of weird because they never went anywhere. But like you said, like some of
Mm,
the characters were really good.
mhm.
And then they went into, if I'm not mistaken, it was Captain Janeway's show. Which one was that?
Voyager.
Voyager. Then came Voyager, and it couldn't grab me except for
Mhm.
the one. I hate to admit this, Seven of Nine. That's the only thing that kept me watching that show.
Yeah,
Um,
And she's coming back, actually.
Yeah, yeah, right. Which I was like, oh. Then after that, it was Captain Bakula, right?
yes,
Yeah.
I guess it was. Yeah.
And my God, that show had so much time travel in it. You're like, what show am I watching?
Now, let me gauge your reaction to this. Then J.J. Abrams comes along and says, "Nah, I don't care about you guys. What you guys like? I'm taking all this stuff out of Star Trek and just giving you action and Beastie Boys." What was your reaction around that whole reset?
Yeah, I actually really enjoyed it. It was fun at that time. I wasn't into Star Trek anymore, and then that was just like a fun, um, kind of loud, action-packed movie. So I did go see that, and I thought, oh yeah, Star Trek. I remember that thing. That's cool. And then later on, I got more into the show. So I think those JJ movies can be a great entrance into Star Trek for people who maybe don't know anything about Star Trek, or maybe they thought it was too slow paced. Then they can see those movies, get interested in watching something else, a little bit more character driven, more philosophical, and like that can be like their halfway point.
See, and this is what that this right what you said right there is the perfect explanation of the difference between a Star Trek fan, and I hate to go back to Star Wars, but I'm going to do it, and a Star Wars fan. A Star Trek
Yeah.
fan will say every series has value. This is a great way to blank into or get started with or to enjoy this type or whatever. Star Wars, it's like the prequels were there to start a new generation of people who've never seen the originals, weren't in theaters for those, to have them get an experience, to be intros to the world. And that was not the reaction at all.
Right, right.
It's so different. Now, obviously, Star Trek has a lot of episodes, even in the Next Generation. Are there some of your favorite story arcs that you liked, or episodes that really kind of stick out? That really kind of were that you said you had that moment of now I really am passionate about this.
Sure, sure. Let's see. Well, when I was a kid, even though now we look back on the episode where Tasha Yar died, and I've heard a lot of criticism about it. When I was a kid, when I was a little kid, that episode was, it was scary. Tasha Yar died, and that was sad. And so that was like a really exciting episode for me that I still remember. Um, More recently, like when I started rewatching the show during grad school, one of the first episodes that really stood out to me was Measure of a Man. I thought that was just amazing, and that show came out years ago, and then it still holds up today. And then pretty much like most of the Data episodes, most of the Picard episodes, storylines dealing with Picard and the Borg, or Inner Light, where Picard is has that lifetime of experience in his mind, where he gets trapped on a planet, sort of, raises a family,
Oh, the
becomes
flute episode.
Yes, yes, yes.
the
Yeah.
first episode. Yeah.
Yes. That was a really good episode. And I was looking at the Measure of Man because I forgot that one too. That's actually, I think, something they're going to bring back in the new Picard, because they kind of show a scene. I don't know if you watched the trailer for it. I mean, unfortunately, it's behind one of those paywalls that we keep getting these days. But I saw the trailer, and one of the trailer scenes, it has Data in a drawer, just
Yeah.
disassembled. And it
Mhm.
looks like at some point, for some reason, which I guess is the story point, he comes back. They reassemble him, and it's just kind of interesting, given that episode specifically about the legal battle for your own body, almost.
Right. Right. Yeah.
And it
Who
still
knows?
holds true.
Yeah. Exactly. It was a great episode. And then it's kind of been recreated by the Orville, but it's been more updated. Where at the end of the Orville episode, there's not a perfectly happy conclusion where they solve all the world's problems. So I thought that was really good on the Orville. But going back to Next Gen, it can be really it can be really comforting to watch a show where they deal with all these really like real and dark issues, and then they wrap it up in a tight little bow, and everything is safe at the end. So it's fun, and it can be really comforting and inspiring too.
Yeah, and that is one of the things that I think the Orville did. Did you watch all of it before it's going behind a paywall as well?
Yeah.
Okay, because that did the same. You're right. It did that. The grittier version, I guess. And even though it was supposed to be a parody, I mean, it was supposed to be kind of the joke, it really started to do some episodes that were like, that's not a joke. And you're not treating it like a joke. You're not making a parody anymore. You're trying to be quasi legit.
Mm-hmm.
And it changed a lot of people's minds about that kind of thing, and about how we kind of take a show and not and messy it up, I guess, is the idea, right?
Right. Right. Yeah, that's a really good point. Like it's kind of like a joke and a parody, like sort of like making fun of Star Trek, but at the same time, it has a lot of the qualities that you love about Star Trek. So then it is just also a legitimate version of like a great sci-fi show.
Right, and I've always said this: the best sci-fi writing to me is always when it's allegorical. Well,
Hmm.
and I think Orville did that well. Now,
Yeah.
unfortunately, I wasn't able to see a lot of the last, the a majority of Discovery that was on the
Mm.
CBS app.
Yeah.
I don't know if you caught any of that, but like the reaction from it, from like true like Star Trek fans, really wasn't that well received. How
Yeah.
what did you think about that?
Um, let's see. Well, the first season, um, it they really play, if we're talking about just the show, they really played the long game, where they set you up. Like if you know a lot of Star Trek, then you think, oh, this, I'm not sure if this is really Star Trek. This Captain Lorca guy, he's not really like a Star Trek captain. This show is much darker. A lot of things aren't making sense. And then towards the end of the season, without giving away spoilers, um, a lot of things start to make sense, and then there is a payoff, and you go, oh, that's why it seemed like it wasn't Star Trek, but now I get it, and it is much more Star Trek. And they really played the long game that way, where people were uncomfortable for a long time, thinking that they weren't getting the show that they were supposed to get. Um, Yeah, it's a funny thing. And then as far as the reaction of the fans, it's interesting when you have an expectation, and if something doesn't meet that expectation, whether it's good or bad, it can just feel wrong and icky. Like when you think you're drinking a Pepsi, but then it's actually iced tea, and it feels just like, oh, what? Like something seriously wrong, even though you might love iced tea. So I think people's expectations weren't being met, and that was uncomfortable. But then in season two, I think it turns into much more of what people really wanted, and I think it was done well.
What is? Isn't there a term there? I mean, I'm going to pull on your PhD here for a second, if you don't mind. There is actually a term for that, though, isn't there? Like a psychological term for when people experience that.
Yeah, I'm not sure what term would fit the best, but one thing that is
Yeah,
coming to mind is maybe cognitive dissonance. Um, let's see. So when
that's
somebody,
what I was hoping you were going to say. Actually, I was thinking that in the back of my mind.
yeah,
That was what I was. Yeah, that's the one. Actually, that's exactly. Wow. Yeah, you hit the nose on the head. Um, that's good. No, because it's ironic because you get that a lot, and that's kind of the discomfort that these shows and movies have the same kind of feel built in. I mean, they tried to do it. I think they pulled it off successfully with the Spider-Man movie too. With the whole I don't know if you've seen it yet.
I haven't seen it yet. I'm way behind
Okay,
on the MCU.
that's okay. You can watch it and not have to know anything else about the MCU except what
Okay.
happens at the end of Endgame. But you know that you have to see that to live.
Yeah.
But they do the same thing there too, and they do it a lot in a lot of older movies. Not as well, where they kind of try to make that switch on you. A lot of
Mhm.
those, what I call the psychological thrillers, like
Right.
Inception. You
Right.
know,
Right.
those types of Shutter Island,
Mhm.
which ironically both have this one of the same actors in them. Um, but those types of genres really kind of trying to pull that away from you and think it's one thing, and then just totally pull the rug out from under you.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Then some.
and it's
Oh, go ahead.
oh no, go on.
Oh, I was just gonna put on my movie critic hat a little bit, and uh,
Oh, good.
some and sometimes that's done really well, where you have a certain type of expectation, and then it doesn't happen, and you're blown away, and it's great. Like in the early seasons of Game of Thrones, where everybody was sure that Ned Stark was going to live, and then even though all the signs pointed to him dying, you still thought he was going to live, and then he died. And as far as the power of the story, it was amazing. But then you can also just subvert expectations, just maybe for the sake of subverting them, and then people are left feeling unsatisfied, like kind of like the last season of the Game of Thrones, where it seemed like things were just happening, maybe just to surprise you, and not really in order to tell like a great story and really connect with the audience.
Which is kind of a weird reversal, right?
Mhm.
Because I mean, the Ned Stark thing happened like what? The very that was the end of the first season, if I remember
Right,
correctly, or
right,
something like that.
yeah,
So you build up to this, and you get exactly what you didn't want to happen, but you
right,
knew it was going to happen. And in the end of this, I mean, because I binged watched all of them. Like I waited
yeah,
until it ended. I said, "Don't tell
hmm,
me anything. I'm going to binge watch it because it's one of those things you just gotta kind of
hmm,
watch all at once." And I binged all the episodes right before the
hmm.
last episode. Like I
Oh,
caught up just in time.
wow,
But that ending, a lot of people felt, as you said, it was a build up saying it was going one direction, and then
mhm,
they pulled the rug out from under you. I mean, if you think about
right,
what our dragon lady did,
hmm,
you know, they totally screwed with everybody. They said, okay, she's going to get it. She's the one. She's doing the right thing. And then she starts to, okay, she made a mistake. It's okay. It's okay. She can come back. She can come back. And then she doesn't. And
right,
you're like, what? No. What?
hmm, hmm.
And then the last scene, and you're like, and that is that kind of where that unsatisfaction came from, do you feel? Especially with that series?
I think so. I think it's you know in the earlier seasons when it was still based off of the book, everything made sense. It was all based off of the characters, and they were really like after something terrifying happens, like Ned Stark dying or the Red Wedding or something like that, when you look back, you go, "Oh, everything was leading to that. I can't believe I missed it." Everything makes sense when you think about like the psychology of the characters. Like, of course they did that. And then in the final season, it's like, wait a second, but why did this character do this when everything I thought I knew about the character said he was going to do something else or she was going to do something else. Like it just like it wasn't the characters that we knew anymore, and we couldn't really look and understand why they made those decisions or what exactly was leading up to that outcome.
And that's the key. I think you're right. I think that's the piece of it. If you can reasonably logically say, okay, yeah, it's definitely not what I
Mhm.
expected to happen, but it's reasonable at the character
Right.
level, then that's one thing. But if they go totally left field with it and it seems quote unquote out of
Mhm.
character, then you totally will lose the audience in every way possible at
Right.
that point. Which again, they did it right before the end, and then you got the protests of people like, we want to refilm the whole thing, and we're going to sign
Mhm.
petitions, and it's like, you guys, it's done. They've gone home. They're not even in the room
Right.
anymore. Why are you continuing to
Right.
argue? Nobody cares. So it gets really weird
Mhm.
with that. But before we go further, because we have definitely some other things we want to talk about. We want to try to go into some of the clinical psychology of building a character for some of
Sure.
these shows. But before we do, we want to take a very brief commercial break, and I want to talk about some of our sponsors for the show, which we want to thank. First, we want to thank Podcoin because they are the ones who get us the extra listens. They are the ones that keep us out there amongst the people, and we thank them very much for that. But I also want to take a hot minute and talk also about where we're actually hosting all of this content, and that is, of course, Anchor. Anchor.fm is where we host all of our content for all of our shows, so you can listen to them on all of your devices. And I'm talking everything from Spotify, Google Play, Apple, all across the board. You
Mhm.
can listen to us on every platform. So I want to thank you guys for listening. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back.
Seamless transition.
And we've returned. Yes, it is seamless as always. Arnie, I want you to kick us off. I want to talk about, why don't you tell us what we're going to talk about, Arnie? Because you're next.
Well, I wanted to talk to him because earlier you mentioned that you liked Rocky.
Yes, yes. I love Rocky. He's one of the great sports heroes of all time as far as movies go.
Now you've seen them all.
Well, let's see. I know I've seen them all in my life. The main one that I've seen is the first one, and then I'm most familiar with, of course, the one with Drago, where it's like montage after montage. That's awesome.
Yes.
Rocky, I think it was five, Rocky Balboa, and then the two Creed movies.
Okay. All right. So you got them all.
Yeah.
Perfect. I have seen them all as well, and Rocky was a big part of like every kid's
Yeah.
life, like in the late 70s or 80s, like going into the 90s. Because I think Rocky 5, which is the one with um, Tommy Morrison.
Oh, okay, that one. Yeah.
I, yeah, that was one. That was his last one of that original run. With still
Mhm.
like Talia Shire was still
Yeah.
involved with it. I think it was the last of the originals.
Mhm.
Now go into that whole like because I remember like the fervor of like what the first Rocky movie did
Mhm.
for like people watching
Sure.
it. Like even though he didn't win at that,
Mhm.
it kind of gave people like the you know what I may not win, but at least the thought of me like doing something and just trying it is good enough reward.
Right.
Do you think that's a fair assumption to say that's what that character's supposed to like exemplify?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And a lot of times in sports and just like in life in general, people can do something called all or nothing thinking. That's an unhelpful thinking style that can lead to a lot of problems. Or you can also call it black or white thinking. That's where something is either one way, like it's either all good, it's either perfect, or it's completely bad. Like there's no value to it. So all or nothing thinking. Um, So a lot of times in sports, people will think, well, they'll say things like second place is first loser. That might sound kind of cool, but you know that can lead to putting a lot of pressure on someone. That could lead to focusing only on the outcome. So like if you if you're thinking about uh, the outcome, like you have to win, then you're not thinking about the task at hand. You're not thinking about the things that you need to do, the things you need to stay focused on in order to perform at your best. And the best way to get the outcome you want, the best way to win, is by focusing on the process, by focusing on what you need to do, which will lead to better performance, which will lead to winning. So even if all you care about is winning, what you should be doing, or what would be very helpful to you, is to focus not on the outcome, not on winning, but just on your performance, your task. So that's what would help you in sports, but then also just in life. There's only going to be one best in the world. So then, if you're not that person, are you going to feel bad about yourself? Are you going to feel not good enough as a person? Even though you might be an Olympic silver medalist, you might be the second best. If you go on a vacation with your family and you don't get to do every single thing that you want to do, is the vacation now terrible and a huge waste of time? So all or nothing thinking can really cause a lot of anxiety in people because they put pressure on themselves. It can cause depression because nothing is ever going to be perfect. So then that means everything is bad, everything is terrible. And Rocky, he does a great job of at least, he goes on this journey, and then at the end, he didn't necessarily get the outcome that he wanted. He didn't, win the belt. He didn't, um, he didn't knock Apollo Creed out in the first round, but like proving how amazing he is. But he proved to himself that he could give it his all. Like he focused on the process. He left it all out there. He did his very best, and then that was satisfying to him. So that I think Rocky does a great job of teaching that lesson.
So, and I want to ask like what the characters meant like on a
Mm-hmm.
psychological point of view. Who was Mickey in that whole story? Like
Mm,
what does Mickey's character represent?
sure. Yeah, let me think about that. So so Ricky is kind of he's a father figure to Rocky. We don't learn a lot about Rocky's about his family, about his early life. All we know is that he looks at his mirror and he sees a little picture of himself as a cute little kid, and then we see him what he looks like today, and maybe his face is all bruised up, and he's living in an apartment that's kind of in shambles, and um, it's his life, and we know at the beginning of the movie his life isn't what he wants it to be, and we see from that cute little picture, that picture of him as a cute little kid, that like we're supposed to think, oh, he was adorable. People, he probably had a lot of hope. People probably had high expectations for him because we know that he's a really good athlete. Um, and he's charming and all that stuff. But then for some reason, his life did not turn out the way that he had hoped, or that people had probably hoped for him. And we know that Mickey is, he's sort of like he's the trainer, so he's this this source of wisdom, this source of guidance. He's essentially a father figure for Rocky, and Mickey is very disapproving of Rocky, at least at the very beginning. He calls him a bum. But then, like through their journey together, and from Rocky, from Mickey, wanting to help him and going from rejecting him to then offering him support and guidance, they begin to develop this relationship, and And when Rocky starts listening to Mickey, he starts doing better and better, and then that helps him, on this process of, performing his best as an athlete, and this process of just personal development and starting to have the life that he wants. So, I mean, I guess to sum it up, as much as I can, Mickey's a father figure who just teaches Rocky and instills lessons.
So I'm going to put you on the spot real quick. I'm going to insert you as into the movie, and you're one of the three judges of that fight between him and Apollo. Do you give him the decision, or do you give it to the champ? Because he didn't, like you said, he didn't knock out Apollo Creed. They went 15 rounds, which is unheard of nowadays. Who do you give that decision to?
Like, that's a really tough question. Without watching the fight and like taking down notes, it would be really hard. But just going off of memory, the thing that made Rocky so inspiring, even though it wouldn't be physically healthy at all, is that he could just take all those punches and then just keep going. So as a metaphor, that's great. Life is going to beat you up. Life is going to be very hard, but you as a person need to weather that storm and stay focused on your goals and remember why you're doing something, why it's important to you, and keep going no matter how hard it is. In real life, don't take those punches. Move your head from side to side.
Yeah, cover up your face. Please put your cover up. Yeah.
In real life, there's probably some CTE, or like there's some there's some damage to the brain going on there. So in real life, I would say Apollo landed more punches and therefore probably won the fight. But as a metaphor, Rocky did a great job, and he had like a triumph of the spirit that was very inspiring.
It seems like two different directions of, and it's funny because for me, Rocky is a great movie of tropes, of the classical, as you said, the classic father figure you see in a lot of movies. You see it in Star Wars, you see it in Star Trek, you see it in Game of Thrones, you see it. You just pick something, you'll find the father figure, or in some cases the mother figure. But typically, you can go like all the way to some of the older stuff. You can go and you still see that figure. You also see that, and that's the question that I really have for you, is that piece there which you talked about is the, yes, taking the physical or emotional damage makes, it's going to be thrown at you, and to overcome it is the better option, is a lot of what the movie talks to, than if you just try to avoid some of that damage in the first place, you'd actually be better in the long run. Is that something that you've kind of experienced at all in your clinical, or your, when you've done your work with people, that they have this mentality of, I'm going to take these hits in whatever emotional or physical, whether it's a sports person or not, rather than, well, here's some techniques to avoid that, so you're not injured?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the answer is kind of nuanced. So on one hand, what you're saying, I completely agree with it. Someone can really, instead of making bad decisions, or I don't want to say bad, but unhelpful or unhealthy decisions that could lead to a lot of emotional pain, what they could do is think about, like maybe taking a breath. Maybe a lot of these decisions are based off of emotion, and you're stressed out and your adrenaline is pumping, and so then you act impulsively, and people can really benefit from taking some deep breaths and slowing things down, and then thinking things through, and really helping themselves to not react to some kind of emotional trigger. But then on the other hand, so that's true. And then on the other hand, a lot of mental health problems will come from avoidance. So that's a little bit different from what you were talking about. So a lot of times when someone has a negative emotion, like let's say social anxiety or performance anxiety, if you're an athlete, they might just avoid whatever situation is going to cause that anxiety. So let's say Rocky had like a lot of performance anxiety. He might say, okay, I don't I don't want to feel this performance anxiety anymore. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drink all night, and then he's going to cope with his anxiety or avoid his anxiety by drinking alcohol, and then maybe he'll be hungover the next day, and he'll say, "Screw it, I'm not even going to fight." So that avoiding what's causing or avoiding feeling the performance anxiety is effective in the short term, because in the short term he's not going to feel that anxiety, but in the long term, he lost his big chance. He's going to probably lose his support system. Adrian's going to say, yeah, I can't believe you did that, you blew it, I don't want to be with you anymore. Who knows what's going to happen. So avoidance can have lots of problems like that. So what people need to do is kind of approach those negative feelings without avoiding it. So allow themselves to feel that performance anxiety, and then over time that anxiety is just going to go down on its own. And the more and more you just allow yourself to do things that cause you anxiety, the more the anxiety is going to go away and not be a problem anymore. And then you're going to be able to live the kind of life that you want to live and perform the way you would like to and do your best.
Wow. I don't know about you, Ernie, but I feel smarter now.
Yeah. Man, I'll tell you what, the next Rocky marathon, we definitely have to get together to watch this, man.
Yeah. Do you feel they're going to continue the story for Rocky, given kind of the last couple of movies and how they didn't necessarily live up to what we were hopeful of? And now that I think Sylvester is coming out with the final movie for Rambo. Like, what?
That's hard to say. In the second Creed movie, it seemed like they were really trying to wrap up Rocky's storyline, where he had a falling out with his son, and then he keeps thinking about getting back in touch with him, and then at the end he has this moment where he knocks on someone's door, and then they open the door and you see that it's his son, and they have like a really nice moment. So it seemed like they were just trying to close his storyline. Rocky got that closure. He finally has the family that he wanted. Like that's what we're led to believe. So I don't know. I think and Sylvester Stallone, he's getting up there in years, so I think they're probably going to just wrap it up and maybe have some cameos in the next Creed movies. But yeah, he might be done.
Well, I have to say the first Creed movie, like that, like someone sent me the trailer like in a text message, and I had no idea what it was until like he's standing. I think there's a point in the trailer where the kid's looking at a picture, and I'm like, wait a minute, that's Rocky punching Apollo. And I was like, oh my God, it's a Rocky movie. And then you hear his voice, and it's like everything explodes after that. So I agree with you. I think these movies are going to be less about like Rocky himself and more like just, hey, whatever happened to him? Like, did he finally get happy? Because his wife tragically died of cancer, right? Is that what I think that's what he said in Creed, if I'm not mistaken. Oh, in Creed, I think Rocky was like, because he was getting tested for cancer as well, and he was like, I want to die because this is the way she died, right? I think that's so we're getting the impression that she passed away due to a long like illness.
And then I think in Rocky Balboa, he kind of briefly mentions like the way that he says it, like she died of a woman's cancer. So it was cancer, maybe breast cancer, something like that.
Right. So like he's all alone now at this point, and I guess like you said, his relationship with his son, and I think in Balboa, his son kind of like rejected him for being Rocky. I think it was.
Yeah, because I think they're telling us that Rocky's son always lived in his shadow. It's very hard growing up with a father who is this essentially a legendary figure, and that maybe that put a lot of pressure on him. Maybe that made him feel very small. Maybe that made him feel like he could never live up to his father. So then he tried to create a completely different identity. He's not a boxer. He's not like a working class guy from Philly. He's a guy in a suit who works in a big fancy business office. So Rocky's son just rejected him and the idea of him, and was trying to go in a completely different direction in his life.
Now, quick question: do you ever come across this like in the real world, where like maybe you see it from a distance? You'll see like these families that were like maybe the patriarch or like the older part of the family were all like sports oriented, and then like their children, they kind of like have that same moment, like in the movie.
Yeah, that can definitely happen. I see oftentimes what I'll see, because I work with athletes, so what I'll see is just a little bit different, but still very similar. Where maybe it's the athlete doesn't really know why they're doing it anymore, and it's a lot of it comes from pressure from the parents. The parents want them to get a scholarship, maybe, or the parents are putting a lot of like their dreams and their ambition into the kid, and a lot of times the kid has just lost all their passion in the sport and are just kind of doing it because the parent wants them to. And then I've even worked with some athletes who that kind of dynamic was going on, but they also thought, well, on the other hand, I do love this sport, so I don't want my parents to ruin, my enjoyment of the sport. So we'll work on kind of dealing with all that pressure from their family, and then also helping them to find their own reason why, like their own motivation and their own value system and their own goals for sports, and try to put that pressure from the family to the side, and then focus on what it is that they want and what they want to get out of their experience.
And that's such a positive message for today's youth, because we're come to an era now that's kind of like a participation level of everybody has to participate, everybody has to play, everybody has to be the best, everybody has to win. And it can be so hard on kids when they're like, yeah, I just want to play because it's fun, as I enjoy the sport. I don't care win or lose. I just want to play and be the best I can be. And it's such a hard thing in a lot of communities to kind of see that for one reason or another, where parents are just, it's all the pressure is there from the parents. The kid wants to play, but the parents are just making it almost unbearable for them to enjoy playing. And that's just a hard thing it's a hard thing. And it feels, and you kind of are probably closer to it than the rest of us, it feels like it's a growing trend.
Yeah, I don't know what the statistics are, but it's definitely something that's very present.
Yeah. And prevalent in a lot of cultures. So it's kind of crazy. Well, I want to first. We've been, if you can imagine, we've been doing this for almost 50 minutes. We've gotten lost in this. This is really great. We're definitely gonna have to have you come back on again in the near future for more Rocky talk, and see if we can sneak a view of that Picard series for those of us who aren't willing to pay an arm and a leg for another pay portal. Just one more after the other. But I wanted to give you a chance, Jason, before we end the show today, if you had anything you wanted to promote for yourself, to get that little mini ad for yourself in today.
Well, let's see. Not so much. Well, you can check out my private practice's social media. We're on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook as @CBT SoCal. So you can follow us on that. That'd be awesome. That's where I promote the stuff that I do. Like, I work with women's premier soccer league team. I work with lots of teams and athletes at Whittier College, so I promote a lot of the stuff I do on that social media. And then, thanks for having me on. This was awesome, and I'd love to come back. We can talk more about Star Trek, about Rocky, about Star Wars. I love Kylo Ren, so we can talk about this.
We're gonna have to have you back before the next movie comes out. We're gonna do that then. We're gonna have you come back before the movie, before December, so we can talk about that. Well, thank you. And look, if anyone is out in the California area and needs some good CBT, if you will, Cognitive Behavior Therapy Center
Yeah.
of SoCal, if you will, definitely reach out to Jason and reach out to his group. We'll put some links in the feed, of course, as always. We want to thank you so much for being on and having a great. I mean, I feel smarter about how these characters are built and what that. To quote you, that cognitive dissonance really kind of feels like, because I love that. That's one of my favorite terms, and I love hearing people actually be able to explain it well. I was like, yes, I can hear it done well. Finally, I can take your explanation and use it. If you guys are following us, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Pinterest, of course, which thank you, Pinterest. I don't know, we've gotten like 100 visitors and followers in the last couple of weeks, so yay. And of course, we're trying our hand at TikTok. We don't know if we'll make anything of that, but we're holding our fingers high and hoping for the best. But definitely catch us on all your favorite podcasts. And Ernie, make us feel a little cognitive dissonant, if you will, with a nice
Peace out.